Good evening, everyone. 6 o'clock. I'd like to call the Northern Regional Advisory Committee meeting to order. My name is Sarah Winslow, and I chair the advisory committee. We've got some new members, so I'd like to go arrange in the room first, and those members to introduce themselves, and then we'll go to those who are joining us virtually.
Wayne Dunbar, Pamlico County.
Missy Fort, Dare County.
John Worthington, Camden, Dare County.
Kowski, Durham County. I'm Keith Bruno from Pamlico County.
Stuart Creighton, also Pamlico County.
Lorena, biologist, Manual office.
I'll keep going. My name's Bennett Paradis. I'm in Morehead City.
I'm Joe, biologist in the Wilmington office.
And I'm Jesse. I'm the Marine Fisheries Commission liaison.
And now we'll go to those joining virtual. Morton,
I'm Morton Gaskell. I'm from Oak Grove, North Carolina, commercial fisherman.
Thomas,
Thomas Newman. I'm from Martin County, but I fish out of Hatteras, commercial fisherman.
all right, thank you. Couple of items to go over first. The last couple of meetings we had, if we did have a quorum, we couldn't vote because there was a potential lawsuit that was being reviewed and underway. And it's my understanding now that the attorneys have ruled that advisory committees can vote on agendas and take action items. So with that, I'd entertain a motion for approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Have a motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Have a second. All those in favor, let it be known by saying aye. All
Aye.
opposed, like sign. Motion carries. You received in your packets that we emailed to you. They're not in the packets tonight. The meeting minutes from September the 24th and October the 8th. Hopefully you were able to review those online. I would entertain a motion to approve both sets of meeting minutes unless there are any corrections so noted.
Make a motion that you approve them as delivered.
Have a motion. Do I hear a second? Have a second by Keith Bruno. All those in favor, let it be known by saying aye. All opposed, like sign. Minutes are approved. Tonight, we'll be going over the Eastern Oyster Fishery Management Plan and the Hard Clam Fishery Management Plan. We will be getting a presentation on the Amendment 5. So at this time, I'll turn it over to the division for their presentation on the oyster.
Alrighty. You guys ready? Yep. All right. Good evening. I introduced myself earlier. Bennett Paradis. I'm a biologist in Morehead City. I'm one of the co-leads for the Oyster FMP. I'm here with Joe Fischendela, who's a biologist out of Wilmington. He's the other co-lead for the Oyster FMP. Our presentation today is going to focus on reviewing the proposed management strategies within the current draft of Amendment 5. After we present these ideas, we'll open the floor for questions and discussion. So for perspective of where we currently are in the FMP process, here's the timeline. We held a 3-day advisory committee workshop in July and incorporated edits into this current version of the plan. And so the MFC has voted to send this out for further review. This advisory committee is one of 4, which will review the draft of Amendment 5 of the Oyster Management Plan and vote on recommendations. Following the discussion and reviews held by these ACs, the MFC will then select preferred management options, and the draft amendment will be sent for DEQ secretary and legislative review. So tonight, the main focus of discussion will be on the issue papers and the preliminary management recommendations posed by DMF. This stage in the process allows for further review and discussion of ideas for management strategies concerning oysters in North Carolina. The amendment itself is comprised of a base plan that provides background information on the biology of the species, a description of the fisheries, an economic impact summary, and an overview of the oyster resource as important habitat. There are also several appendices that provide further detail on DMF management policies and enhancement programs. The management strategies that are proposed in the recreational harvest issue paper and the mechanical harvest management issue paper are the topics that we'd like to focus on tonight, as these are areas where we have focused on revising the amendment. So we're going to focus on Appendix 1 and Appendix 2. So I'll start with Appendix 1, which is the recreational shellfish harvest. Next slide. The number of recreational shellfish harvesters in North Carolina is currently unknown, which makes it extremely difficult to estimate the total recreational harvest of shellfish. An issue acknowledged in all past Eastern oyster and hard clam plans is the inability to accurately estimate the amount and extent of recreational shellfish harvest in the state. Due to the widespread accessibility of intertidal oysters and clams along North Carolina's coast, the potential impact for recreational harvest could be significant, resulting in a large data gap in landings data. The division is striving to establish the best available data sources across the fishery to complete a stock assessment. Given North Carolina's shellfish fisheries are exclusively under state jurisdiction, a lack of recreational shellfish harvest data makes it extremely difficult to address potential management issues such as harvest limits, size limits, and gear restrictions for this fishery. North Carolina and Virginia are the only two states without some form of license, local permitting, or residency requirements for recreational shellfish harvest. Another concern of not having a license requirement for recreational shellfish harvest is the inability to easily communicate health concerns associated with harvest from temporary or permanently closed polluted areas. Shellfish harvest areas are highly regulated by the NCDMF Shellfish Sanitation Section for human health and safety. This section is responsible for classifying all coastal waters as to their suitability for shellfish harvest for human consumption. Within coastal waters, areas are classified as approved, conditionally approved, restricted, or prohibited. These classifications are used to keep consumers safe and healthy. As no license is required for harvest, participants are often unaware of stipulations or closures and are unable to be targeted with educational material. Having a separate license or for shellfish harvest could automatically link to essential information updates on shellfish harvest areas. So creating a specific truffle or a recreational shellfish permit would provide DMF with a complete pool of recreational harvesters. That list would then be used or could be used as a survey frame to help determine the effort in the fishery as well as the total harvest that occurs. This would then allow for distribution of educational materials and information at the point of sale to any potentially recreational harvesters. Additionally, having a list of the population of recreational harvesters, that'd be useful to help distribute information on area closures and proclamations and maps. If shellfish species get added to the already existing truffle, then the activity survey during sale of the truffle would still need to be conducted to identify those fishers and participate in recreational shellfish fishing. And then those participants could be sent additional surveys to determine effort and harvest estimates for the recreational fishery. In order to pursue any of these potential solutions, a significant amount of time and effort will need to be expended by DMF to assess internal program and resource capabilities. And we also have to consider limitations as well. So any potential desired legislative changes require a specific process and are ultimately out of DMF's control or the control of the MFC. To best resolve this issue, DMF proposes that the division explore potential, NCDMF proposes that the division explore potential options and solutions outside the fishery management process. I'm going to go ahead, turn it over to Joe to cover the recreational harvest, the mechanical harvest.
So this is kind of one of the bigger issues in the oyster management plan. So I'm going to kind of give you a real high level overview of this, and we can get into any more specific details or questions you have in the discussion. But so This issue kind of is looking at addressing management for the mechanical harvest fishery for subtidal oysters in Pamlico Sound and only wild oysters because the plan's only looking at wild oysters. And kind of the goal of this management approach is to kind of address three pieces. One, kind of address and maybe solve some of the issues that the commercial industry has had with how we've been managing the fishery to this point. Two, kind of look at some of the issues that have been identified in the Marine Fisheries Commission's Coastal Habitat Protection Plan regarding mechanical gear and kind of the disturbance to habitat it can potentially create. And three, kind of solidify our current culture planting program and strategy into the oyster fishery management plan. So the existing strategy, how we currently manage the mechanical fishery in Pamlico Sound, is we're actively monitoring harvest areas. The sound is broken up into 4 management areas: Dare, Hyde, Pamlico, and Noose, and we're out there with the goal of actively sampling where the commercial fishery is actually happening. So the goal of this strategy, it's a habitat protection strategy. So the threshold of 26% legal was chosen as the point where damage to the resource is greater from harvesting than kind of what was decided is worth the fishery, kind of the value of that fishery. It's designed to close the fishery when it's reached that threshold to prevent excessive damage to the habitat. In recent years, participation has dropped from when this strategy was initially introduced, and that's made it harder for the division to go out and actually find where there's areas of active fishing when we're going out sampling. This has caused some kind of the industry to be a little bit upset because we may not be actually sampling areas that are representative of where are being fished. And so currently, the season length is determined by the division sampling. So this can be highly variable between years depending on the condition of the oysters out there. So we'll go into a season, the divisional sample, we can potentially quickly close an area via proclamation if that management trigger is tripped. And it leads to a lot of uncertainty to fishers between years because some years, if the an area may be open for 10 days, some years an area may be open for the full potential season. So kind of this uncertainty and variability has been viewed negatively by harvesters in the current management approach. So on kind of the habitat side, kind of addressing some of the issues in the Commission's Coastal Habitat Protection Plan, historically, those deep water reefs in Pamlico Sound used to reach 13 feet off the bottom. And we know that these deep water reefs suffer mortality from those low dissolved oxygen events from storms below a certain point. So if the reef doesn't reach kind of a certain level off the bottom, the oysters will die during these low dissolved oxygen events. And we see this on our current sanctuaries where oysters that are above a certain height will survive and below will die. So in order kind of for long-term for these deep water oyster reefs to potentially, be resilient against these low dissolved oxygen events that happen with storms, they really need to gain some height to be able to kind of survive. And so we also know that historically Pamlico Sound used to have a lot more oyster reefs, in particular in the deep water areas, and that the abundance in these reefs has been documented to have declined. Many of the reefs where historically there were reefs, so we went back and have gone and looked, they're now just kind of reduced to shell rubble and shell hash, not having that kind of height off the bottom, just kind of being a flat area of broken shell. And kind of declines in these reef heights have been attributed to decades of fishery effort, and mechanical harvest has kind of been pointed to as the most destructive potential oyster fishing gear. And so in areas open to mechanical harvest, the division has been planting culch, so putting out hard material for oyster spat to settle on and kind of form new oyster reefs. But you can see all the blue squares and yellow triangles kind of show all the culch planting sites around Pamlico Sound. And you can see that they're focused kind of in the shallow areas and the bays around the sound. And there has been no culch planting effort in kind of out in those deep water areas. And so between 2000 and 2022, a total of 2.1 million bushels of culch material were planted in the mechanical areas of Pamlico Sound that were open to harvest, but only about 450,000 bushels of oyster were mechanically harvested in that time. So that's resulted in 4.8 times more bushels of culch being planted than oysters that were mechanically harvested. And then if you kind of zoom in closer to more recent times, since 2018, the culch planting efforts have really ramped up, and the oyster mechanical fishery has actually kind of dropped down. 36 more times bushels of culch have been planted compared to bushels of oysters commercially harvested. The return in harvest per bushel of oyster culch planted in North Carolina likely varies across different planting sites, and the impact of culch plantings on oyster landings isn't immediate, since it takes about 3 years for an oyster to grow to be from legal size from after culch is planted. And again, some culch sites have relatively short lifespans, and some culch sites have been continuously providing oysters since the 80s we know of. But the current management of oysters in North Carolina does not distinguish between division constructed culch planted reefs or wild naturally occurring reefs. So an oyster is an oyster on public bottom out in Pamlico Sound. So right now, the culch planting effort in Pamlico Sound is exceeding the amount of harvest removed. So we're at least keeping up with, if not staying on top of, that amount of hard material that's being removed from the sound that oysters need to attach and grow on. So culch plantings do form low relief harvestable reefs. So we're not planting out in the deep water areas to kind of form those high deep water reefs and getting that high relief. And they're not planted over areas of existing oyster reefs. So we're planting, no culch planting has been documented in those deeper portions of the sound and to restore those high relief reefs. We can go ahead, that's fine. So kind of to address these concerns that we have from both the industry, habitat side, and as well as kind of solidifying our culch planting program into the management approach in the fishery management plan. In this issue, we propose kind of 3 tiers of management. The first one is deep water oyster recovery areas. And so these areas, kind of the overarching like goal or kind of the big picture for these areas are we're valuing the habitat of those areas over the fishery value of those areas. The second level down would be culch supported harvest areas. And that's kind of how we're managing now, where the habitat value equals the fishery value. And that third tier are rotational culch sites. And these sites are where we prioritize the fishery value of the oysters there over the habitat value. So that first tier is the deep water oyster recovery areas. And we are proposing 2 separate deep water oyster recovery areas. And we took input from the Oyster Advisory Committee and we shrunk them down from what we had first proposed. So those boxes right there are based on the navigational beacons out there in Pamlico Sound. So basically what we can define on the ground and kind of make a box of existing markers out there, as well as kind of encompassing those deep water oyster that are deeper than 5 meters, which is kind of that cutoff where they really start suffering from low oxygen events during those storms. And so we do know that after the hurricanes like Florence and Matthew, those in around 2018, they suffered mass mortality where basically they virtually all died out there. And our sampling showed very few live or legal oysters since 2018. And since then, there's been spat settling and they're starting to grow. So we're starting to see oysters recovering out there. But all it'll take is kind of one strong storm event, a big DO problem, and then they'll all be dead again. Again, there's been no culture planting effort out in these boxes to kind of help add more hard substrate for that's being taken away. And so kind of these deep water oyster recovery areas, we propose that mechanical harvest is not opened in these areas. And right here, just kind of as an illustration, of the photo on the left are oysters from Pamlico Sound in a deep water area. It's actually on a sanctuary, but kind of what like a healthy high relief reef looks like. And on the right is one of the natural oyster rocks out in the mouth of the Neuse River, where they're basically reduced to kind of shell hash and rubble. So that second tier we were talking about, the culture supported harvest areas, again, it's kind of similar to how we're managing now. We're just kind of looking at a different way of deciding how setting season lengths. And again, a significant amount of culture planting effort has occurred in kind of the bays and the shallow areas around Pamlico Sound. The proposed area where we're kind of managing culture supported harvest aims to encompass all the culture planting sites. And there really be no change, we're not proposing any change in bushel limits, season dates, area management areas, kind of all the same. What we're proposing is replacing the current trigger monitoring system and creating a fixed season lengths by area based on our division sampling. So again, we took some feedback from the Oyster Advisory Committee and kind of refined the approach we proposed by adding an additional level in here. So kind of how this would work, we would create email, or probably email and phone number that the industry could give us locations to sample. So a key piece of this is the industry providing us sampling locations to sample pre-season. Without those, we'll be, rely on our historical knowledge and kind of areas we've been sampling. But so we receive pre-season industry reports telling us kind of where to sample. We go out and sample these areas. Based on the condition of the oyster in those areas, we'll set the season length. So those season lengths were kind of established by looking at past data we had from all the trigger sampling we've done, for kind of how long a season would last, by what the oyster resource looked like prior to the season. The season would open. We would want, encourage the industry to give us in-season reports of kind of where they're sampling. And then we would do one in-season sampling event, go out, sample again, kind of compare it to, the season lengths table we have. If it looks like, we're right on and the condition of oysters will probably reach that 26% legal threshold in the amount of time we set for the season stands. If it looks like we kind of undershot it and there could be many more weeks of season, we'd adjust and lengthen that season, and then we could modify it. So it'd basically be, instead of us going out and sampling every 2 weeks, we would sample once in the preseason, set the season length, and then once in season go out and resample, kind of using the feedback we get from the industry to go out and modify the season length if needed. And again, we can go into the nitty gritty of that afterwards. I have lots of information on that. And that last piece would be creating rotational culture sites. So these would be large 10-acre culture sites. that would be open to mechanical harvest throughout the entire mechanical harvest season, so that they wouldn't be under that culture supported strategy. So it would just be open, the day one of the mechanical harvest season all the way through the end, not subject to that trigger sampling or the season lengths for the culture harvest program. So we're talking about creating 4 sites per management area. So that would be 16. And so right now we have 10 constructed to date, and we'd have all 16 completed by 2026. And they'd be closed for 3 years, open on that 4th year. Harvest would be allowed, and then replenished with culture material as needed and closed again for 3 years. So at any given year, there'd be 1 site per management area open. And these would all be in the 15 bushel per day areas. So the preliminary division recommendations are for Appendix 1, the recreational harvest. The division recommends exploring potential options and solutions for developing recreational shellfish license or permit outside of the FMP process. And for Appendix 2, the division recommends adopting the deepwater oyster recovery area. So not open those kind of deepwater area boxes as defined to mechanical harvest in order to let those deepwater reefs accumulate shell over time and gain some height. The division recommends the season lengths, kind of adopting the season length framework that's outlined in the issue paper to be predetermined based on preseason sampling of oyster condition. And again, we'd create that mechanism for harvesters to report sites to us, kind of directing us where to sample during the season. And that third component, the division recommends creating that series of rotational 10-acre culture sites that would be open to harvest on a seasonal basis. And again, these sites would be open the entire potential mechanical harvest season and not subject to those shorter season lengths that are established via the division standard. And so right here is where we are in the fishery management plan process. So the advisory committee, we're meeting tonight to review the draft, and we're also looking for public comment. And so with that, I'm gonna hand it off to Jesse to tell us what to do next.
Thank you, Joe. So next, Sarah, if you wanted to kind of take over here, the idea we had is really just after this presentation, if there's any questions that anybody has specific to the presentation or anything, now would be an appropriate time to ask them. And then after this, we have another presentation about clam, and we'll do the same thing. And then we can move into the real discussion portion of the meeting where we get to talk about the different options and do the good voting.
Any members of the advisory committee have questions relative to the presentation? Yes, sir.
Guys, for the division, do you have I'll say an initial preference for what you're looking at to capture the recreational harvest on these oysters?
So I don't know if it's the division. I think we need, our initial preference is essentially that we need some more time to kind of figure out what the best approach is, because we don't want to jump into something like a permit that would potentially be a ton of work that we may or may not be able to actually administer, or going, getting them added to the CRUFL takes legislative action, and that may or may not be a wild card. So I think right now, I think we're looking at what we really want is the kind of commission blessing to, yes, move forward and do something, but not being directed.
Sure. And if you get that blessing, what kind of time period are you talking about to make that decision?
However we go, it's, a multi-year process for sure.
3 years, 5 years?
3 years probably, to at least get something rolling.
Other questions relative to the presentation?
You sit out in them deep water, Worcester rocks. You said there was some known to come off the bottom 13 feet.
Historically, that's what we're told by the people who were out there 100 and something years ago, right?
So that's a false. And I've been doing it for 50 years out there. They've never changed. And your idea of you gonna leave them alone and let them grow, let them die, and let them grow and let them die is gonna build up in the water column. Is that your idea?
Of over time, correct.
100 years, 50 years?
I mean, I don't want to put a time on it, but I mean, realistically, we're talking like an inch a year. Yeah, it's going to take some time.
Realistically, what?
An inch a year is kind of what we expect. If we're going
Let me tell you that for 50 years, they've never changed. Okay? They've never changed.
there's been,
And the deepest, and the ones in mouth of the Moose River and out in the Pamlico Sound, I can't speak for the ones around Englehart, Pamlico River, but those have never changed, okay? And the furthest any of them come off the bottom is like 6 feet. Okay? Some years, like since the hurricane, you're right, it killed every oyster around there. Okay? We hadn't oystered out there in 7, 8 years, okay? Or 6 or 7 years, ever how long it's been. But there's times when we work on these inshore rocks that y'all have planted, there's times that we got to let them rest. And if there's oysters out there in them deep waters, we need to oyster on them deep waters. We don't need nobody to tell us when there's legal oysters where to go catch them and where not to catch them. Okay? I mean, if they're out there and they're harvestable size, we need the ability to go out there and go catch them. It don't need to be closed because that's not going to change. I'm speaking with 50 years of experience. Okay? I mean, it's all a good idea of we're going to let them grow out the water column where the water's good, but that ain't going to happen. Because when they die, the tide rolls through there and it washes that stuff right off. Okay?
I think that's part of the reason to not allow mechanical harvest, because, clearly dredging over them, the whole goal is to remove them, right? And having a solidified oyster reef, that's kind of not what you want. So I guess we're proposing that, yes, they'll potentially die in those deep water events, but they'll stay less broken up and hopefully together to then have more oysters, settle and grow and stay kind of more a reef instead of just kind of a rubble field. And again,
They've stayed like that for 50 years. See where that's going to do anything. That's just common sense.
I guess the difference is, these were really, really over harvested, well before 50 years ago when they were kind of really ground down. And there's been, mechanical harvest over that 50 years. So I guess the thought is maybe changing that, changing that variable of not having mechanical harvest and see if we can get some recovery.
I know, but why not harvest them if they're legal?
I guess the thought is the value of oysters as a habitat, whether it be to themselves or other organisms, is greater than the value that they provide as a fishery resource. And I mean, that's what we're proposing, right? And that's what we're asking you to decide and the commission to vote on.
So we'll do away with the human aspect of it.
This is what we're putting out and looking for feedback on. So
The other
Okay?
component,
Well, I'm just.
this is your feedback. So yes, please.
In my feedback.
Yes.
yeah, the other component is that there's going to be rotational harvest sites that are 10 acres.
So when we work these inshore rocks and they're available out there, we're out of business. Right. That's a no-no.
But the habitat aspect is dealt with in the chip.
And so,
Importance.
yes. And so this is where, at least how we're currently doing things, and someone may tell me otherwise, that this is an issue that's identified in the chip that the oyster fishery impacts the habitat. So to address that habitat impact, we're addressing it in the oyster fishery management plan.
Sarah, I believe Thomas has his hand raised.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, how big are these DORA areas? I sent y'all an email on December 12th asking about what size these DORA areas were. Do y'all have a number on that?
Yes.
Can y'all hear Tom?
Can you repeat, because we can hardly hear you?
Yeah, I was wondering what size those DORA areas were.
What size the door areas are?
Yeah, and so we have them, so these proposed deep water oyster recovery areas. Oops, sorry, they're, it's pocket slide 27. Yes, so this right here is the Neuse River one. And while it looks, oops, sorry, we're on different slides. So we're right. Yeah, the Pamlico River one, sorry. And actually, so it's big, but the notes are switched. So, but the actual footprint of potential oyster habitat, so the yellow in there is potential oyster habitat. So it's not even where we've documented living oysters, oyster reefs. It's where there has been hard substrate or actual oyster documented, I mean, between 1887 and 2007. So it's a pretty big window. So that, you know, the entire box of that DORA is almost 17,000 acres, but that's just the box. And we're making that box how big it is based on those channel markers and the lights, basically on the water markers where we could actually have something on the water without having to put out our own markers to kind of define those areas to make it enforceable. So the actual footprint of potential oyster habitat, and again, is in the ballpark of 500 to 600 acres of potential habitat. And that was kind of calculated using the one for the Pamlico area is kind of, there's a little bit of uncertainty in there because we haven't actually gone out and mapped those in a long time. But the Neuse River one, that one's got a lot less uncertainty with it because it was mapped in 2007. That's 22,000 acres, 22,005. And in that, there's only 180 actual acres of potential oyster habitat. And again, that's potential because, again, a lot of the stuff we've gone out and actually, you know, laid eyes on or mapped is just shell hash, or some of it's not even there anymore.
What?
So the boxes do look big, but the actual amount of oyster in there is a lot smaller than those boxes.
Why are y'all asking for such a big area? That just seems like humongous area.
Initially, you know, we were kind of looking at encompassing the majority of those deep water oyster areas that were below that kind of 14-foot, deeper than 14 feet out there. And I think you can see that the line around the map there is that 5-meter contour. So kind of the area below where we know they're vulnerable to that dissolved oxygen issues during storms. And just the boxes, the design again is just for enforceability using those on the water markers. And again, you know, as an advisory committee, your feedback could be shrink the boxes, and that is an option there to, you know, shrink them down if that's what you'd like to propose.
Yeah, I definitely would propose that later on. And I mean, I could see a lot of different ways to draw that box using the lights. use 4 instead of 7 or 8. But as well, there's a lot of oysters. I've worked in both of those boxes. I've worked in both of those boxes, and there's oysters in both of those boxes. And a 10-acre Colt site is pale in comparison to what that place can produce. And there's guys out of Hyde County right now working inside of that other box off the Pamlico River, and they worked there last year, and there's the most oysters there they've ever seen. There's no sense in closing such a big area that's so productive and can be so productive for something that may or may not come back. With climate change and all the uncertainties, with more rain, pollution's getting worse. We should be trying a lot smaller test sites, something similar to about the size of the areas we plant. I also had another part of the question to my email. Did y'all get an answer to the participants and what they harvest?
Okay.
Thomas, can you speak up?
You sound-
Are either the speakers in here on?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had a second part to my email, a question I'd asked. I didn't know if staff had that together.
We have those numbers. I don't think I sent it to you, Thomas. Sorry.
So are these areas proposed to be closed forever, or will they be open if something grows?
So assuming that the commission votes to close these in this plan, it would be for the plan, and then the next plan, it could be reevaluated and the commission could do as they please, or between plans, I think it would require another, opening up the plan again, another amendment and change management, midway through the plan. But at least plan to plan, it would be closed.
So how often do these plans?
So 5 years or 7 years.
So are these areas going to be closed to trawling?
It would just be closed to mechanical oyster harvest. With this plan and what we're proposing. So, I mean, in theory, someone could go out there and dive and harvest by hand or come up with some sort of giant rake. But I mean, it's realistically probably very little of that would happen. But we're just proposing to not open those to mechanical harvest within that box.
Okay, I got one more question. Whose idea was this?
It was a combination of oyster biologists within the division and outside, I suppose.
Sarah, Thomas has his hand raised again.
Pardon?
Thomas has his hand raised again.
Go ahead, Thomas.
I couldn't see how to put it down.
Morton does now.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand what the need for closing these large areas is. Like, is there a real good reason that this has been identified as being needed? Because I would like to know that before I would vote on something that could potentially take large areas of harvest off the table for people. And I'm not even a participant in the oyster fishery, so I just would like to wrap my head around it one way or the other first.
So oysters are unique that they're both a fishery resource and a habitat, in particular their own habitat that they need to kind of continue. And so issues from mechanical harvest and impacts from mechanical methods was identified in the commission's coastal habitat protection plan as something for us to kind of minimize efforts from mechanical methods. So this kind of came from that push in trying to address some of the goals that were outlined in the commission's adopted coastal habitat protection plan. And so at least to date, the habitat protection plan, items in it, they're not making changes to act like how fisheries are operated in the coastal habitat protection plan, but identifying habitat issues that are impacted by how fisheries operate. So in this oyster FMP, we're addressing that concern of habitat impacts from mechanical harvest gears to the oyster resource. And so since we do know that these areas during those low oxygen events suffer mass mortality, and they're kind of patchy where it's cyclical, whether there's harvest occurring or not, and there can be large years, gaps in time between when they're harvested. It's proposed that we say that they're more valuable as a habitat than they are as a fishery resource, and kind of draw these boxes to kind of address that concern in the coastal habitat protection plan of mechanical harvest on these deep water reefs. Basically, these deep water reefs are the most vulnerable. They're kind of the worst impacts from mechanical harvest are occurring on these deep water reefs. And those shallow reefs in the bays, we don't see the mass mortality happening in those storm events. And we're also doing a lot of culture planting out in those shallow areas to kind of mitigate the shell loss that's happening from harvest. So
There's also estimates out there that less than 5% of subtidal oyster reefs currently exist compared to what was once there about 100 years ago. So that's what you see on those maps, the yellow dots. Those are the subtidal oyster reefs that once existed.
Did I understand you said how many years?
100 years, 1887.
130.
So how many, oyster rocks in this area do y'all sample a season?
So
Or the trigger sampling program does that.
yeah, in that box, so we'll say that Neuse River box, there's 5 sites within the box every 2 weeks-ish. And then so 5 outside. So the trigger sampling
Every 2 weeks out of the year, is that what you said?
every 2 weeks out of the mechanical harvest season we do one preseason sampling like September-ish, and then every 2 weeks-ish during the mechanical harvest season until it closes, like particularly in 2019 when we were seeing like 0% legal out there. Once the season closed, we just stopped sampling out there because there was no way we were going to see it get above 26%, and we didn't want to keep grinding on just nothing or what was trying to recover. But yeah, so that original trigger sampling program was set up having basically 10 sites per each management area, so 40 sites every 2 weeks, and we try to do about half in the deep water, half in the bays for the Neuse and Pamlico areas that have a lot of bays. So yeah, we would love to do more sampling. I think that's one piece where if we move towards kind of the approach we're proposing here with the fixed season lengths of us only having to go out and sample twice, we can hopefully be able to kind of use the effort we have and the limited resources to do some more sampling to kind of get a better idea of what's going on out there, instead of now we're just trying to stay on top of the mechanical fishery and not really getting maybe some of the data we'd want to get, kind of looking at fishing mortality and just being able to better sample without having to do so much sampling all the time. We could do kind of a more refined approach. And either way, whether this doesn't pass at all, we're still going to try to refine our sampling to get at some of those questions better. But
You said, material removal outdoes the harvest of oysters.
So right now, if you look at it like sound wide, we're putting way more material into the sound than we're taking out shell wise. in those deep areas, we're not putting any material. So any harvest that would occur out there, we're not kind of making up for that by putting any culture material out, and we're not really seeing, when they do grow and if they get harvested, it just takes a long time for them to grow back. So we don't have any specific numbers for out there of like a shell budget, but
Probably where don't get me wrong, it's a good thing, put the shell and stuff out. But probably over a third of that goes into mud or under the water. That's just forming a foundation. Okay,
oh yeah,
so
but I mean,
does that add up in your move?
we're at, what was let me look at it. It was, so in recent years, we're planting 36 times more bushels of culch than is removed. So I mean, even if half of it sinks, we're still doing pretty well right now. And so that's kind of the thought of creating those rotational areas that are outside of the management, the season lengths, is that would give the industry a better kind of being able to utilize that culture. We're putting out a ton of material, and maybe letting it be utilized a little more by having those rotational sites that are just wide open and letting them get really fished on to kind of better utilize the culch planting effort we're doing, and having them in those, kind of rotational discrete boxes will let us go back and, reevaluate, replant those areas, close them down, let them grow, and open them up again. Then again, the 16 areas right now, that's what we can commit to with the current funding of the culch planting program. But if, this approach really works, and assuming the culch planting program continues to be funded, that could be something we just keep increasing throughout time. But right now, we can do 16 sites. If this is implemented, we can do 16 sites, no problem, based on the current, what's funded for the culch planting program and what we have out on the ground.
Morton, do you have another question?
Yeah, I think you answered it sort of already. I do know the Coastal Federation has gotten a massive grant from NOAA, and they're doing a lot of oyster sanctuary planting. Mainly, it seems to be in the western part of Pamlico Sound. Is what they're doing factored into any of these calculations? Because these are all oyster sanctuaries that are going to be off limit to harvest, just to build up habitat and theoretically build up the oyster stock by giving, I guess, more real estate for them to propagate. And I was just wondering if that had any factor in what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, so those are part of the two-pronged approach with the oyster rehabilitation program, or approach that we're following at DMF. So the sanctuaries, those are closed to harvest, and the idea is there is that they supply larvae to the rest of Pamlico Sound, more or less. So the habitat is created pretty abruptly in those areas. Right, we're putting down these ridges that are about 6 feet off the floor, and so that habitat is built, and then within a year we start seeing oyster spat settle on them. The idea with the deep water areas is that we don't have the means to build up those areas so abruptly and so quickly, and so probably the most effective way to see those areas be restored is to limit mechanical harvest. As far as the actual numbers and the calculations, the sanctuaries are not really factored into that necessarily.
Yeah, so the bushels of culch we're talking about planted versus harvest, that's planted in areas open to harvest, not as sanctuary or otherwise. It's that much culch is planted into open harvest areas.
Okay. And one more thing I had is, how much of a declining effort in this fishery could be I mean, how much of the declining of effort in this fishery can be attributed to why harvests are down? Because this is something that keeps coming up with everything in the state, is that there's just so few commercial fishermen fishing in just about every fishery, and it doesn't seem like it's factored in to any of the management process.
So for oyster, right now we don't have any really good fishery independent indexes of oyster abundance. So we can't tell, like, I can't tell you like, oh, the oyster abundance is increasing and participation is increasing following it. But what we do see is landings follow participation closely. And so less people participating because, and we're landing less, or there's less out there, therefore less people are participating. I can tell you that, what we see in the deep water areas, that, I mean, the oysters just haven't been there. But that's kind of the question, are participants declining because the resource is declining, or are they just declining and then landings are going down because there's naturally less people? For the kind of mechanical harvest areas, don't know. We did look at it a little bit in the hand harvest areas where you can see the catch, basically the bushels landed per trip were dropping, even though looking at the participation. So it's kind of suggesting that there are more participants harvesting oysters in at least the intertidal areas than there was resource to kind of support them to continue to get that 5 bushel limit. But again, that's something we're kind of working on addressing, and would ideally, if we didn't have to trigger sample so much, we could use the effort we have, the manpower, to kind of develop, that's on our, kind of long-term goals, is develop a fishery independent index for oysters in Pamlico Sound. So that's on our radar, and we want to do it. It's coming, and just we don't have that to answer that question.
In those Dora areas, is there any overlap with no trawling?
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure. So kind of wanted to stay as far away from shrimp as I could.
I'm just trying to figure out if it overlap.
And obviously I mean, what I get anecdotally is that people aren't trying to trawl over, at least that's what I'm told, oysters while shrimping. And there's no data for, obviously you can't land oysters while shrimping, so there's no data. And I'm being told now there is no overlap between the two.
Real quick, you said that the advisory committee shrunk these boxes. Do you have any idea what the original size was? For example, I'm looking at the map on the, and on the Neuse River, there's, I would say, significant deep water areas to right around or just west of Oriental. Did you guys have that in the original plan?
So
Not.
the original proposed deep water oyster recovery areas encompass the entire 15 bushel per day areas of Pamlico and Neuse management areas, and that was not received well. So based on that feedback, we slide 20. So you can see everything that's not that the red hashed areas and the Neuse and Pamlico areas. So the kind of the light blue, just water.
Yeah, okay, that answers. Thank you.
So, after the advisory committee meeting, they definitely didn't like that. And I heard them, and we kind of tried to focus them down into really targeting those deeper than 5-meter oyster reefs out in the middle there.
And are you going to do any material planting on these Dora areas
So
if approved?
as far as I know, we're right now, we're not permitted to plant in those areas. If they become deepwater oyster recovery areas, I'm not sure what, I guess that'd be,
Yeah, that probably would not be within our wheelhouse, just like for funding. We're working with the Coastal Federation. They fund, or they, help fund the sanctuaries essentially. And then the Colch budget comes from appropriated funds, and that goes to planting material down that are within a nationwide 27 permit. So that's restricted to shallower areas or no, yeah.
So without some kind of outside help, you're just gonna let them sit?
So the idea is that, yeah, over time, over the course of 5 years, we would have,
Hope they grow an inch a year
we would,
for the next 1,000 years. Until they die again from the hypoxia that nobody talks about and kills them all in entirety. And then we got shell degradation and it just washes off into the mud. And all you've done is restrict opportunity for oystermen and commercial fishermen again. Joe, have you done anything about your procedure for sampling? Because for years, you guys have been the joke of the industry. You go out there, you do 10 circles with 3 miles of cable out, and it's asinine. Have you changed that at all? I've done a lot of work with Dan Boland to try and form a plan. I love your 10 acre rotational ideas. Dan loves it. It's a great idea. But you said, oh, we're going to take 22,000 acres and we're going to give you back 40. What bank would take that? That it's insane to think that, oh, we're just going to give them 22,000, but they're going to give us 40, but then they're going to hold the keys to those 40 acres as well and only tell us we can go there when they want. So that's really, in effect, more off the table that we're not allowed to go near, more area that we're not allowed to go near. Not that oysters would grow there without your help, but maybe they got just as much a chance of growing there as maybe the whole deep water recovery area will suddenly leap up 15 feet in the next 20 years. The shell degradation is incredible. You talk about us, oh, we're only harvesting 15 bushels. How much culture material do you think we should be taking when we're taking out 15 bushels? You plant an area, nothing but shell and rock. Oysters grow there. We take 15 bushels. Why should any of that culture material be removed if we're taking 15 bushels of live oysters that grew there? You put 10,000 bushels of culture here. I take 15 bushels of live oysters that have grown on that 10,000 bushels of culture. Why should I take any of that culture that you put there? It stays there. We chip it off the oysters. It falls back down.
Against the law of thinking.
It is. It's against. I can't take the shell home for my wife to paint because it's against the law. But you've got these numbers that say, well, here we're only taking so many bushels of oysters and we're leaving all this culture material behind. We're putting in a lot more than we're taking out. Isn't that great? Isn't that a wonderful goal to be only harvesting what is good to harvest and leaving the rest of that? You don't have to put it back. It's still there, except in these deep water areas. It's spatted twice in the last 8 years. All those crappy shells were covered and spat like this twice. And Mother Nature killed them in their entirety. Had nothing to do with us. But now you want to take the opportunity. Now those rocks are covered in quarter to 50-cent piece oysters. There's a lot there, a lot. We want to harvest those next year. They're going to be ready next year, the year after. We're not going to take the shell. The shell goes back. 15 years ago, there was an issue. There was a definite issue. We had guys coming, keeping their boats up and culling them all the way back to their port. And that culture got dropped all along. It was bad. Marine Division figured out the problem, figured out the fix. It's fixed. It's done. It's better. This is not better. This is insane. This is restricting opportunity again. And you know what's going to happen next year when all the little inshore rocks are beat up? Because you think there's less oystermen, but I can tell you with my own eyes, I'm seeing more people out there last year than the year before. I've not missed a year. Last year was more than the year before. This year is more than last year. There's more guys harvesting oysters. So we're going to beat up those inshore spots that are viable at the moment. They're going to get beat up. We're going to need those offshore spots to go to next year. as long as Mother Nature doesn't kill them. If you put those off limits and the inshore stuff is beat up, everybody's gonna go trout fishing. Make a bigger problem of that. You gotta leave some stuff spread out for guys to do different things. This Dora, this is a vision of hell. I'm sorry.
I hear you.
I care about this fishery. I work tirelessly with Dan, and I know you must know Dan. We've been hearing your name for a lot of years. You know a lot more than you're letting on here, I believe. Before you even open the season this year, Luke Burry told me that you guys did your sampling and didn't find enough live oysters to open the season. You were thinking about not opening the season. I won't divulge that name and I cannot prove that, but I believe it because like I said, if you guys haven't changed your actual sampling routine, if you guys haven't streamlined that procedure, made it into procedure, you guys are just dragging shell. You don't know what's there. You're just dragging shell.
So I am with you on not liking our current trigger sampling approach, and I would very much like it to change. And how this is set up is basically it doesn't prescribe how we're to do it. So I would like to sit down with all of our oystery people and kind of come up, because right now our habitat enhancement section is the one who's doing the sampling. So I would like to really come up with a way to streamline, incorporate Dan's approach. Basically, right now, how we're doing it, we're not getting the data I would like to see. And so whatever happens here, even if we have to continue doing the every 2 weeks, if the commission votes status quo, we don't change anything, the sampling approach, how we're doing things has to change and will change. But going towards us not finding enough oysters this year, but that I didn't hear that, so I never received that data. But
I'm glad it opened. I've not gone a day without getting my limit, and we've gone every day that we're allowed.
And it looks great so far. And so
Big oysters, beautiful oysters, but there's a lot of guys. We're gonna catch them.
And I do see, we are, compared to 2010, the participation has dropped way out. But in the past couple of years, it is creeping up a little bit. So trying to go all the way back around.
Yeah, I dumped a lot on you there.
So the deep water oyster recovery areas, we're proposing it and we love your feedback and make your advisory committee recommendation, please. The trigger sampling approach is kind of,
your guess is as good as ours on when if you want to guess the beginning of the season, look, I think it's going to close middle of January. Well, great. That's been kind of average for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. Middle of January, end of January. So you guess middle of January, you send your man out. Oh man, there's still plenty of oysters here. It's really in effect not a lot different than what you're doing now.
exactly.
They're cutting some trips out in the middle that are really just kind of BS trips anyway to fulfill the statute.
Yes. So what we're proposing here is basically doing what you said. We're using all the past data we had to kind of look at how long the seasons have lasted based on that preseason condition. 46. That one. So that's how we came up. We basically, in the issue paper, there's a table that shows, if we go out and sample and it's X% legal, this is how many weeks it would get. And that's based on all the trigger sampling data from 2017 to 2023. And we picked that area because kind of 2016, 17, the efforts kind of it's around the same level. It's stabilized a lot more than that dropout from 2010. So that is kind of how we propose the fixed season lengths in that kind of middle approach there. And again, kind of going out, as you said, you can, based on kind of the preseason condition, kind of forecast, okay, you're going to get, looking at our data. So that gray line is in the bays. And so it kind of levels out at 6 weeks because the bays are only open for 6 weeks. So as long as you've got at least whatever that is, 33%, I don't know, on the table, you're going to get a full 6 weeks no matter what. So that's kind of how, and then we have less and less data as you go higher and higher because it hasn't been that high. But you can see like basically taking this approach, looking at the past data we have, and if we would have used these season lengths that we're proposing in this table, it basically underestimates how long it takes to close the season by an average of 1.75 days. So like if we would have went out and sampled, saw that it was 32%, gave you that 6 weeks, you get 1.7 days more than you would have got if we would have went out and done the trigger sampling across it. So it's pretty darn close compared to, but so just in case we're off, that's why we kind of propose that second in-season sampling. And one huge key piece of this is that industry reports. We really, 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 really need you guys to provide us kind of that information, whether it be, coordinates in an email, just leaving a voicemail. So we'd like to have, an email and a voicemail box where you can kind of, okay, this is where we want you guys to sample, and we'll actually sample there. Yeah, I totally agree that it's been rocky the past few years of trying to where, one, we've had, some staff turnover, and two, just finding spots where people are fishing, especially if we're kind of in the bays between that 6-week window when it's closed and there is no one fishing out there, but we have to go out and sample. So having some guidance, kind of really kind of solidifying that step in our management of having you guys provide us sampling locations would be very helpful for us.
How many times have you sampled so far this year? I saw you guys once on day 2.
I saw y'all out there one day.
They've gone,
This is in the News River.
Yeah, News River system.
I seen the guys out there one day.
they should have gone,
I took him to a place to sample. Okay? But one day.
gone
4 times.
Yeah.
And there's 2,000 rocks that they could sample. They've sampled 40 of them.
Oh, no way. They didn't sample 10 a day.
Well, I'm talking about within the time, the 4 times they went.
Right.
If they did, if they did 5 a day or 10 a day, that's 40. There was 2,000 of them out there that they could sample. So.
Well, the trick is,
So
I hardly saw you, and you saw him once, and I saw him once, which means that we were working a lot of different places.
Yeah.
And we only saw him one time.
But anyway, I mean, it's, the sampling is a bad problem for y'all. For us too.
And it really,
Because I mean, if you would have put me in charge or him in charge, we'd sample all 2,000 of them for you in a year. No problem. But we're getting 20 done a year, 30, 40, 50 done a year out of 2,000.
Well, Sarah, I don't want to cut off conversation, but we do have the clam presentation to get to. If we wanted to go ahead and move to the clam, we can kind of come back to the oyster discussion.
So we'll move into clam.
1 second, pull that up.
Good evening, advisory committee members. My name is Lorena De La Garza, one of the clam co-leads, and Jeff Dobbs, the other co-lead over there. I will talk. Yep. I will talk briefly on some key points from the hard clam base plan. Then we will be focusing on the mechanical harvest issue paper and preliminary DMF management recommendations. For your reference, this is where we are in the FMP development timeline, the same as oyster, and we're here today for the advisory committee to review and receive such comment on draft amendment 3. As I mentioned, I'll be going over the goal and objectives for hard clam and a characterization of the fishery, an overview of Appendix 1, the mechanical clam harvest issue paper. Then I'll go over preliminary division recommendations and open it up for discussion. The goal and objectives for Amendment 3 were approved at the November 2023 MFC meeting. The goal of the North Carolina Hard Clam FMP is to manage the hard clam resource, to provide long-term harvest and continue to offer protection and ecological benefits to North Carolina's estuaries. Currently, the available hard clam data comes from commercial landings, fish house sampling, and recreational survey of cripple holders. The recreational survey does not provide data for the entire recreational clam fishing population, as you do not need a recreational license to harvest clams in North Carolina. Without complete recreational data, we cannot accurately estimate total removals. The issue was discussed earlier during the oyster presentation, but is a shared issue between plans. This graph shows North Carolina commercial hard clam landings and trips from public bottom from 1994 to 2022. Landings and participation have been in steady decline across the entire time period, mainly due to market demand. Our focus today is Appendix 1, which is the clam mechanical harvest issue paper. The number of participants and trips in the mechanical clam fishery on public bottom have steadily declined since the 1990s to the lowest levels on record. This, along with habitat concerns associated with bottom disturbing gears, as well as resources needed for the state to manage and monitor the fishery, has caused the division to re-examine the mechanical clam fishery. This graph showing mechanical clam landings from 1994 to 2022, shown in gray bars, is the number of clams. This also includes the number of participants in the fishery, which is depicted by the black line. Harvest during this time peaked in 1995 at over 8.7 million clams, and then declined to less than 100,000 clams since 2017. Participation mirrored a similar decline with 138 participants in 1996, then declining to less than 10 each year since 2017. This figure shows which water bodies account for the majority of the landings from 1994 to 2022 using mechanical gear. Mechanical clam harvest landings have been dominated by two water bodies, the New River, shown in yellow, and Core Sound, shown in gray. Enforcement and maintenance of the designated mechanical clam harvest boundaries require substantial resources from the state. Each year, division staff mark all the mechanical clam harvest area boundaries with posts and signs to ensure enforceability of these boundaries. Staff replace all missing or damaged posts and signs affected by weather or vandalism. Additionally, many Marine Patrol officers are required to monitor and enforce these areas. In Core Sound, the vast area open to mechanical clam harvest, along with its zigzagging boundary, makes enforcement difficult and resource intensive. The last piece of background that I'll go over is the allowance of mechanical harvest permitted prior to maintenance dredging. Through rule, the division allows the mechanical harvest of clams before maintenance dredging to occur in some navigational channels. The purpose of this rule is to allow commercial fishermen to access a resource that would otherwise be destroyed during the maintenance dredging process. This process requires collaboration between the fishermen, the division, and Army Corps of Engineers. This rule has not been utilized since 2007, primarily because of the complicated process and limited interest. One of the primary concerns with mechanical clam harvest is the damage this harvest method can cause to the habitat. Bottom disturbing gear, which includes dredges and trawls, cause physical damage to hard clams and their habitat. Soft bottom habitats have historically been considered the most appropriate location to use bottom disturbing gear. However, organisms living in this habitat and adjacent habitats can be harmed by the gears. Mechanical gear used to harvest clams are escalator dredges and clam trawls. Current fishery regulations prohibit the use of mechanical gear on SAV beds and live oyster beds, and it's only allowed in designated harvest areas because of the destructive nature. Another habitat concern is sedimentation, as mechanical gear can create significant turbidity issues. Bottom disturbing gear can have negative impacts on clam beds and oyster reefs directly and indirectly. Direct effects include the physical damage caused by the gear, and indirect effects include the resuspension of sediment. High levels of suspended sediment can reduce successful settlement of larval clams and oyster and can smother shellfish by clogging their gills. These two maps depict two mechanical clam harvest areas, North River on the left and Bogue Sound on the right. From 1981 to 2021, a series of studies were conducted to map SAV beds across the state. The SAV maps generated from these studies were then overlaid onto the mechanical clam harvest areas to map to see where SAV overlapped. The mechanical clam harvest areas were then adjusted to eliminate overlap and provide a buffer. An example of this overlap and area modification can be seen in the figure on the left of the North River, where the red dotted line now shows the new southern boundary line. On the right is Bogue Sound, the Bogue Sound clam mechanical harvest area. So due to the large extent of the overlap, this mechanical clam harvest area has been closed. These changes occurred after Amendment 2 in 2017. So now shifting into the socioeconomic analysis for this issue paper. Here's a table showing annual economic contributions from the mechanical clam commercial fishery for the last 11 years. From 2012 to 2022, ex-vessel values have varied from a high of approximately $285,000 in 2012 to a low of approximately $19,000 in 2020. The industry expanded in 2021, but has not returned to pre-2016 landings or participation, which has steadily declined over the period. Each year, the division uses a large number of staff and resources to monitor, manage, and enforce the fishery. These resources may be difficult to justify for a fishery with such diminished value. State resources may be better used to fund projects more beneficial to the clam fishery as a whole. In the background, we discussed mechanical clam harvest prior to maintenance dredging. If the mechanical clam harvest fishery on public bottom were to be discontinued, it's necessary to end the exception for mechanical harvest in conjunction to maintenance dredging, as it's currently allowed by rule. This would further benefit the habitat by reducing the extent of turbidity issues associated with mechanical gears. Again, this program has not been utilized since 2007. So I'll now move into the possible management options. Status quo would allow the fishery to continue to operate as it currently does. This would allow for the continuation of a historically significant fishery that provides important supplemental income to some users. The fishermen currently operating in the fishery could continue and new harvesters could join. State resources for demarcation and enforcement would remain the same. Concerns about effects of bottom disturbing gears on structured habitats would not be addressed. Another option is to further limit mechanical clam harvest areas to improve enforceability and lessen habitat effects. This could be done by having boundary lines based on permanent structures and more rectangular in shape that also help with line of sight visibility. This was done in the North River, displayed here. Modified boundaries also create buffers around critical habitat to protect them from sedimentation associated with bottom disturbing gears. As with status quo, the fishermen currently operating in the fishery could continue and new harvesters could join. State resources for demarcation would be reduced, but the resources required for enforcement would likely remain the same. This would help address habitat concerns, but sedimentation would still occur from mechanical harvesting operations. The next management option would be a phase out of the mechanical clam fishery. Due to the requirements of the general statute listed here, the mechanical clam fishery cannot be ended abruptly upon adoption of this amendment. Outlined in the statute, an immediate closure of the fishery could result in severe curtailment of the usefulness or value of equipment in which fishermen have any substantial investment. Additionally, stated in the statute, this would require a future effective date so as to minimize undue potential economic loss to fishermen. The mechanical clam fishery could be phased out over a set time frame, as it was done with the shellfish relay program. This option would allow fishermen currently operating in the fishery to continue during the phase-out period, but would discourage new participants. The phase-out period would allow current mechanical harvesters time to get rid of their gear and transition into other clam harvesting method or fisheries. This option would address the division's resource concerns with demarcation and enforcement, as well as the habitat concerns. Regardless of the phase-out, mechanical gear can still be used in the private sector. After hearing concerns from the FMP Advisory Committee about participants wanting the ability to re-enter the fishery, the division recommends a phase-out timeframe of 3 years from adoption of this amendment, unless landings increase to at least 1 million clams and participation increases to at least 10 participants in the fishery in any year prior to 2027. 10 participants have not been active in a single year in the fishery since 2017. In 2022, there were 3 participants. The fishery last landed over 1 million clams in 2014. And in 2022, roughly 200,000 clams were landed. This increase in landings and participation would show that the fishery is no longer diminishing and is valuable enough to maintain. This is a timeline if both triggers are met in any single year prior to 2027. This timeline would comply with the general statute. If the triggers are met, the issue would be brought back to the MFC for consideration at the May 2027 business meeting, or when participation and harvest estimates from 2026 are available. If the triggers are not reached, the phase out would be complete in May 2028. The phase out period give fishermen 3 years to sell their gear and transition to other clam harvesting methods or fisheries. The last management option to be considered is discontinuing the allowance for mechanical clam harvest in conjunction with maintenance dredging. This would end a program that has not been utilized since 2007. This would require a rule suspension. This option could be pursued on its own or in conjunction with the phase out of the whole fishery mentioned previously. The division recommends a phase out to be completed 3 years from the adoption of this plan, unless fishery participation and landing triggers discussed previously are met, and to discontinue the allowance of mechanical clam harvest in conjunction with maintenance dredging. These management options would only affect mechanical clam harvest from public bottom. It would not affect their use on private bottom. Mechanical clam harvesting gear could still be used in the private sector. And this one.
Questions from advisory committee on the presentation? Gordon?
Yes, I don't really see much that's gained by just taking away another option for fishermen. I mean, I would, if there would be some way that this option could just remain there, and if we could may find a better way to just keep it there. I just don't want that to be shut off to future generations, you know, in case fisheries change, economics change, and all that. And I think a lot of the reason there's been less effort in the wild clam fishery is primarily market based. So basically I'm not in favor of phasing this out.
Questions are relative to the presentation. When you look at the area of around North River and you look at that entire area of Forsyth and previously that area that was reduced in North River, I don't know how many square miles that is combined, but that's a lot of area to mark and enforce for currently 3 or 4 individuals. And it takes a lot of expense. So North Grove area was reduced previously. For saying those 3 or 4 people are probably not working that entire area. Any other questions relative to presentation?
Has anybody talked to, there was 4 clammers working last year? How do they feel about any of this? I mean, have they come forward, voiced their opinion? I don't know a lot about clamming. I'd love to have the opinion of somebody who's in that particular industry and who it affects directly. You know, I could see all this oyster stuff, somebody who doesn't know, never stepped foot on an oyster boat, making a decision is not gonna have the insights that I have. And I don't have the insights that somebody who clams would have in that industry. So do we have anything from any of those guys on this proposal?
Jeff?
Yeah, so at our advisory committee workshop for the FMP, we had someone whose family is in the mechanical clam harvest fishery. And she basically, that's where we heard that, you know, folks might want to re-enter the fishery, and that's why we took that and incorporated it into the plan by having these participation in landings triggers that would then make us reconsider the phase out. Basically, she said some folks may be waiting to re-enter the fishery, but as it currently stands, there's probably a better way to be using the division's resources and to mark all these large areas and have folks out there watching the lines when no one's utilizing them. So yes, we talked to them. Yes, they've provided feedback. And, you know, obviously for the few people that do it, that it is a concern.
It's important to them.
Yeah, and they voiced that, and we said, you know, they said, we're thinking about re-entering, we just, you know, there hasn't been market demand or whatever the reasoning was. And we said, okay, to take that into account, we're gonna put this trigger in, or include this trigger in case people do want to re-enter. You know, this is the time to do it, to show us that this is an important fishery to them.
You talked about the fact that it cost a lot taxing on Marine Patrol to patrol this for 4 guys. Your Marine Patrol, yes, sir? You know most of the guys in your area, do you not? Do you know kind of when they leave the dock and when they don't? Probably more than not, you know. I know our local guy knows when I'm fishing and when I'm home, you know, all you got to do is pass the dock. So to say, you know, y'all are patrolling an area when nobody's using it, I think that's a little disingenuous. You know, he knows when those guys are out there clamming. You know, he doesn't have to go patrol the lines. If there's 4 clam boats working and they're all 4 at the dock, there's no need for the Marine Patrol to check that area for clammers.
Unless you're in Core Sound, that's, you know, 20 miles long.
Well, he still knows if they're home or not, you know. Oh, look, Joe he's out clamming. I'm gonna go find him, make sure he's doing right. You know, at that point, you gotta go and take care of business. But if Joe is at the dock all week, and you also gonna know when he's broke down, you know, that's a lot of equipment on a clam boat, from what I understand. This stuff is hard to keep together. Maybe 2 out of the 4 are broke down. Now he's only got to check 2. And, you know, ride by the dock and see if they're out. Because Marine Patrol doesn't have money to patrol a fishery and take it away from somebody, it's.
So it's not just the financial part of it, it's also the habitat part of it. You know, the commission has directed us to look at bottom disturbing gear and to incorporate that into our management plans as part of the CHIP. So it's cost, it's lack of participation, it's gear that might be causing damage to habitats. So it's a suite of reasons. It's not just, hey, this costs Marine Patrol a lot of effort. Hey, this costs the division a lot of time and effort to demarcate. There's habitat. There's also the fact that it's just not really being utilized by many people.
I understand.
If they clam dredge, it might kill 10 or 12 crabs and 15 or 20 fish.
But in the paper, we discussed that it's the turbidity issue is the problem that we investigate here, and that's the problem we're addressing. We're not physical, issues to the directly, like the escalator damaging fish and clams and other bottom organisms. That's only a small portion of the habitat concern we have because you have sedimentation associated with it, you have turbidity.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't even be concerned about the fish and the crab that get ground up or whatever. Because there's gonna be 30 or 40 little crabs that benefit off of that one crab. They're gonna eat it, there's gonna be 10 or 12 fish. They go over there and eat the remains of those fish. So I mean, that's not a problem.
Yep, and we acknowledge that the direct impact is minimal, but we're concerned about the sediment plume associated with the escalator dredge in a soft bottom habitat.
Is mechanical harvest for clams both considered kicking and the conveyor style?
Yes, those are the two gears that are utilized in the curriculum.
Is, in your opinion, one worse than the other? And of the 4 boats that did it last year, how were they broken up? Are there more kickers or elevators or?
So I don't have the trip ticket data in front of me currently to tell you what the breakdown of gear was between the two by year. And I don't have any direct research to say this one is worse for turbidity and this one is worse for direct damage to the bottom. But generally speaking, we've been tasked to address bottom disturbing gear where we can. And this seems like an appropriate place to do so.
I don't know enough about it. Like I said, I'm asking questions. I could probably do a lot better with pointed, mean questions if I was part of that fishery.
Thomas?
Yeah, I heard staff say that these clams might cause turbidity issues, but didn't y'all make boxes smaller? Didn't y'all make boxes smaller because SAB started growing in some of these clam dredge areas?
Yeah, North River was smaller and Bogue Sound has been closed.
Of course, sound's been reduced as well.
And Core Sound's been reduced.
Well, it sounds like
So
that
in
the bottom dredge is not an issue. It's not decreasing SAVs. It may be increasing it.
So I don't think you can draw any parallels. It's also not been, this fishery has not been utilized to its historical extent. So maybe the reduction in turbidity has benefited the grass. We can't say either way. We don't have the data.
Yeah, well, on mites and maybes, you're ending people's livelihoods. You know, it's not a whole lot of money overall compared to what you maintain, but for the 3 or 4 fishermen that do it, it's a good portion of their income, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see how you can quantify how much turbidity 4 vessels making a few dozen trips a year over a wide area of water is in comparison to it blows 50 miles an hour for 3 days and the whole sound's turbid. I mean, I just don't really see how that's really that big of a cause for concern.
So I will say we're not trying to quantify that. And once again, this is a suite of issues. You have the cost, you have the reduced nature of the fishery, and you have the habitat concerns. So we are bringing this issue forward in the plan for consideration.
All right, with that being said, we're gonna take public comment before the advisory committee deliberates. I haven't seen a sign-in sheet, so I don't know.
That's some questions.
Hold your horses. So James Fletcher is the only one that signed up to speak, so James.
I'll go ahead and you signed up. It's all there.
No, well, I'll let you go, but no, you go, James, because you signed up. You followed directions.
I've been in this since I started in 1960. I bought property to build an oyster hatchery. The state of North Carolina, the Division of Marine Fisheries, CAMA, and the Corps of Engineers have done everything they could to keep me from doing it for close to 50 years. So what you're sitting here and addressing, and the state saying we want to see oysters, don't believe it. It's a damn lie. Now, let's get to the true problem. When will marine fisheries address the true problem with oyster and clam production? Mismanagement by the division and failure to address water pollution. When is the state of North Carolina going to insist that all wastewater either be ground applicated or lake applicated and dispersed that way? Water pollution is the problem. Y'all sit here tonight and listen, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. No, until you address water pollution. Oh, well, we've got a dissolved oxygen problem. It's not dissolved oxygen problem. It's the fact that chlorine that was over applicated in a wastewater treatment plant came down the same in a slug of water and then hit an area. Oh, no, you don't know what you're doing. You're just a dumb fisherman. Well, let's go back and look at the history. I'm not going to go into everything tonight. I've sit here and listened and gotten this. When I was younger, it was a saltwater wedge that was killing the fish, not dissolved oxygen. Now, in my old age, I find out when we had those saltwater wedges that the state of North Carolina was spraying for boll weevil to start the cotton farming. Sprayed the whole state a number of times. If you go back and look at when the state was sprayed, guess what? We were told saltwater wedges killed the fish. We need to ask the division to look back at the history of what has happened. We lost the calico scallop fishery off Morehead City. I don't think any of you are probably old enough to know it, but I am. Now I find out that Camp Lejeune was putting water in the river that went out and it affected the birth of children. Well, you mean to tell me that same chemical didn't affect the birth of fish? A few years, well, I say a few years ago, 20 years ago, the trout were disappearing. Poor fishermen, you overfished them. Look at what happened with the water from Camp Lejeune. Look when the military started jettisoning jet fuel. The problem is water pollution, and the state has failed to do it. Now, y'all can go back and come up and ask the division to address water pollution. If they address water pollution, there'll be plenty of clams. There'll be more than abundance of oysters. But also, the state should allow anybody that's willing to build a hatchery on private land permits. It's right now, it would take me 3 years to get the permits to build a hatchery. And I'm too old to do it. But this younger generation that'll come speak behind me, they need to do it. And oysters and clams should be the cheapest thing on the menu. It should be the cheapest thing on the menu when you go into a restaurant. because we should be able to produce that many. It's just frustrating. I'm too old to see it done, but it's frustrating. Give you another example. I bought 200 acres of oyster franchises, and guess who is doing everything that they can to take that 200 acres of oyster franchises from me? It would not be the Division of Marine Fisheries. If you said that, you would be wrong. I thank you for your time. Come at this problem, not listening to this gentleman over here that's going to tell you to close this area, close this area. Come after it from the water pollution, from the wastewater treatment plants, and stopping the chlorine. That's the deadliest, second deadliest chemical known to man, and yet we put it in. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I'll be dead and gone, but this younger generation needs to be able to make a living.
Come on up, state your name.
My name is Bobby Smith. I'm a commercial fisherman. We grow oysters here at Oregon Inlet. Don't know anything about clams, but clams, the oysters, I know Bruno said he's seen an increase of oyster in the area. Certainly not around here. And those graphs, to me, go right along with all the commercial fisheries. The average commercial fisherman now is probably in his 50s. And gill net and everything is going right on down. And it's, you know, the people are going down with it. You cannot look at the catch and judge how many of fish or oyster or anything is out there, because the catch is, I mean, the effort is declining. It's not because of the catch, it's because regulations, really. The guys flounder fishing. And, you know, that's going to be, I used to do that 20 years ago. That's going to be a done deal. Those guys that flounder fish also used to oyster, they crab pot, all the inshore fisheries. It all goes together. It's not a separate thing. It's like the guys that oyster don't wait all year to go oyster, and they do something else the rest of the year. The clams, if your harvest is going down or your effort's going down, why would you shut it? Why would you shut? I mean, I don't think, but why would you shut it for the guys that do it? The effort's not there, so what does it hurt? And when you take a fishery or oysters, clams, whatever away, how do you know how many are there? If nobody's harvesting, how do you know how many are there in the future, 10 years, 20 years from now? If nobody's out there getting them, how do you know? You don't. There's nobody knows. The oysters, have y'all tried any, I mean, like in Virginia, you know, Chesapeake Bay is doing a wonderful, they brought their fishery back from the dead on the oysters. Eyed larvae, on the culch, more culch. Have y'all looked into, you know, putting larvae out? Do that? I mean, do you even do that?
So in Pamlico Sound, it's not necessarily spat limited. It's more substrate limited, which is like why we're putting such emphasis on the deep water rocks, right? Because that real estate is so valuable. Because that's what's missing from the oyster reef equation is hard substrate, not necessarily the spat. But yeah,
I mean, I grow oysters. I've got oyster here. When I don't take care of it properly, which was this summer, and I didn't flip it like I was supposed to, there's no problem with oyster spat. I can tell you that much. There's a lot of oysters. So if I've got oyster spat on my gear, I mean, where's the oyster spat coming from if there's no oysters? In the Pamlico Sound, it's not just my area. I mean, it travels for miles and miles. So if there's no, you know, you see spat everywhere, there's got to be oysters, right? They don't come out, and they don't come out of the blue. Anyway. Seems like a fix for a problem that you're trying to manufacture. That's all I have.
Anyone else? Bring it back to the table. First, we'll deal with the recommended management options relative to the Eastern Oyster Fishery FMT. I don't know if there's a decision recommend, I mean, if there's a management option slide we can go back to.
I don't believe we have a management option slide where we can just like see every single recommendation that the division has done. We can just step through them as we've done them through the decision document.
Okay.
So if everybody wants to look at their decision documents that we have. This back up.
It's like 23, 24. Like loosely worded initial recommendations, right?
Yeah, that's. So for this one, for appendix 1 here for recreational harvest, this is the kind of the first option that we have for the advisory committee to look at here. And really what y'all are deciding on is if you do want to recommend to the commission for them to recommend to the division to begin exploring potential options and solutions for developing that recreational shellfish harvest license or permit. Basically, if I'm understanding Joe and Lorena correctly here, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the idea is really, does the advisory committee, the Northern Regional Advisory Committee, endorse the division exploring options for a recreational shellfish harvest license, or do you just think the recreational shellfish harvest license permit is just a bad idea in general, and you don't want to recommend endorsing that?
There weren't any, go ahead.
I just want to clarify that we would pursue it outside of the FMP process. Just because it is complicated and may need legislative approval, it wouldn't be tied to this FMP. A process that was done outside of
But it would move forward as a part of it was a recommendation of this FMT by the commission.
it would basically be the commission granting us,
We're tasking the division.
tasking us to look at it outside of the plan.
Any questions relative to this recommendation? There wasn't any questions or discussion on this. Anyone willing to move that we endorse this recommendation of the division?
I'll move for that.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a second. Any discussion?
Sounds like it cost a lot of money and a lot of time. Probably shouldn't do it.
Now, come on, Keith, you know you want to know how many recreational are.
Look at it this way, that you've got to pay for your commercial license. Go out and do it, so why should the person that's coming out on the rec side have to do it? I'm not gonna do it, I'm gonna buy it.
If they'd even charge for the license. You know, we don't know how it would shake out, but
Well, that would be part of the process of developing.
If it is said to be significant, or a big data gap, we certainly need to try to close that. Because one of the biggest things across all fisheries and everything has been data gap reporting, and getting better data from all sources. So this is a way to do that.
We will do a roll call vote.
Before we do the roll call vote, Sarah, can we all just look at the motion up here on the screen, Stu, and just make sure that this is the motion that you would like to make is written here?
Your motion and seconder, are you
That's,
okay with that?
yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Okay. Blake is absent. Bruno,
aye. Let's go ahead and see what they got.
Clark. Aye. Creighton.
Aye.
Dunbar.
Aye.
Gaskell.
A.
Was that a nay?
I think he said A.
Aye. Aye. Yes.
Okay. Thomas.
Yeah.
I believe you skipped Mr. Mikowski.
Oh, I'm sorry. McCaskey.
Yes.
Jamie's not on, I don't think. John?
Yes.
Yes. Moving on to the mechanical harvest.
Yeah. Next, we actually have some of the deep water oyster recovery areas. And this one really is kind of up to the advisory committee, how they want to go about approaching this. The division's preliminary recommendation, and again, Joe and Bennett, if y'all want to correct me about this, please do. But our recommendation is this is kind of a suite of options that we would recommend all together, as in we're recommending the deep water recovery areas. We're recommending the rotational coach harvest areas, the 10-acre areas, and we're also recommending kind of to formalize the coach planting program in this FMP through the area that's kind of the where the habitat value and the fishery value is the value the same. And you can either, if the committee would like, you can make one motion that you're in support of all of those. We can look at it area by area, where like if you just want to talk about the deep water oyster recovery areas now, we can. If you want to see, that's all he's got there. If you want to talk about the 10-acre coach sites separate, this is all entirely up to y'all. How would y'all would like to proceed with this?
Well, based on all the comments, I don't think you're gonna get one.
I believe you might be right about
I think you're gonna have to take them individually.
that.
Have a go at making one motion to cover all.
Go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion to keep 2 and 3 with the not assumption, but with the intent to streamline and adapt procedure for the sampling vessel. And if you could, in parentheses, put based on Dan Boland's study. And because of unknown advantages and great disadvantages to the commercial industry, do away with number 1 and the deep water recovery areas.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to repeat that last part again.
Oh, I can't repeat. Because of the unknown advantages.
Said advantages and disadvantages to the commercial
Industry.
industry.
Because of the unknown advantages and known disadvantages to the commercial industry. Yeah, maybe a period after the, yeah.
And just the option,
The Dan Boland study, period.
option 2 and 3, can we get just a little clarification on exactly what you mean by option 2 and 3 there? Do you mean the 10-acre
Yeah.
rotational
yeah.
sites and the,
You've got them written. I think
So
they
it'd be
could all be,
coach supported harvest strategy and
Yeah.
rotational coach.
they could be worked with, and y'all's idea of having one survey before the season and then put a potential end date on the season based on your own knowledge and this newer streamlined procedural sampling. And I think, and there's just not enough advantage to possibly growing a reef an inch a year, maybe. It's just so much unknown in that whole closure. And you're taking away a lot of opportunity. Almost 70 square miles of opportunity is a lot to take and offer just a few acres back in the rotational system. The rotational system is great. It's addition by addition, not addition by subtraction.
Can you share your screen with me? So I can
Yes.
read what that was.
Casey, did you capture it all?
I'll second his motion.
Yeah, I think it's captured correctly, Senator.
Okay, we have, a second by Mr. Gaskell. Any discussion on the motion?
Wait. And 2 and 3, after, based on the Dan Boland study, period, because of unknown, we're just a little screwy down there. Because of the unknown, there shouldn't be a the after unknown.
Unknown advantages and known disadvantages.
To the commercial industry, we should disregard strategy 1 with the doors. Ben,
Morton, are you good with that change?
Yes, yeah, that's what I thought he was going for. So I just wanted to make sure I understood exactly what he was proposing.
Okay. Jesse, do you have a?
Just where we say we should disregard the door management strategy, would it be okay with you, Keith, if we change that to where it's because of the unknown advantages and known disadvantages to the commercial industry, the Northern Regional Advisory Committee does not recommend the door management
I think
strategy?
that would be better word.
Any discussion on the motion? Yeah.
One question, when it comes to these doors, do we have any data in North Carolina that protecting an area such as this would actually result in growth like you're predicting?
Yeah, swag method, it's a scientific wild ass guess.
So we build sanctuaries where harvest is not allowed in, similar areas of Pamlico Sound, and those grow pretty well. And the only issues they have are below that 14-foot line. When we have the anoxic events, they die. So that, there's evidence that in those portions of the sound, oysters would grow.
I thought this was in deepwater areas that you had targeted.
In Pamlico Sound, there are, what's your deepest sanctuary?
Little Creek is our deepest sanctuary, and do you want to pull up that Dora map of Neuse River?
And this is trying to grapple with the idea that maybe this could work, and that's what I'm asking. The commercial guys don't seem to
Bucket
think that
slides, yeah.
it's a prayer of working, which then it's like they're saying it's a huge amount of area that's lost for very negligible benefit possibly.
So Little Creek is a moisture sanctuary that is to the left of that bombing range. There's 4 squares or 4 dots that make a square. So that goes down to 22 feet. And Joe was alluding to below a certain point, we don't see any oysters growing on that protected habitat. And that's about 16 to 18 feet below that. There's kind of an anoxic layer where we see lower oyster density. So above that, we're seeing oyster densities several hundred to 1,000 per square meter.
Okay, and that purple area is as deep or deeper than that little 4 dots.
Yes.
And you don't, like, from what you're saying, it's gonna be an not thinking they're going to die. Unless you actually put something in them to raise up the height.
So, yeah, we're trying to see if, over time that height will alleviate, give them relief from that bottom layer, yes.
I beg your pardon on the depth of that, oyster reef out there.
Yep.
I've worked around all around it, fished all around it, fished all around it. Deepest spot out there is 13 foot.
I dive on that every year. It's 20 feet.
Yeah. You don't go to 22 foot. You got to go a long ways off of that reef to hit 22 foot, a long
Okay.
ways. You got to go.
You can come look at my dive
You
watch
got
next
to go a
time.
mile and get off of that.
All right. Any discussion on the motion? We're not getting in a scratch match.
Been out there every day. I know.
All right, roll call vote. Absent. Bruno,
Aye.
Clark,
Aye.
Creighton,
No, because I would like to see those doors examined further.
Dunbar,
Hey,
Gaskell,
Aye.
McCoskey. Chairman,
Yes.
Worthington,
yes.
Winslow, no. So that took care of those issues, oyster except adaptive management.
Yeah, so since you recommended, adopting that strategy to the culture supported harvest strategy, there is an adaptive management piece in there.
It
It's
basically is adaptive management.
Number 2.
there's one piece of adaptive management that, since the fixed season lengths we came up with are based on kind of participation from 2017 on, that if that participation changes within, I forget what it is, 25%, it's on the slide, then that would require us to kind of go back and just reevaluate those season lengths. So if it, less people are in the fishery, our season lengths are probably too short, and we can go and stretch them out, or if more people jump in, we may have to shorten those seasons based on what we're seeing during our sampling. So it's just kind of a way to keep us making sure that those fixed season lengths, if something crazy happens between plans or a ton of people jump in or a ton of people jump out, we can be flexible without having to, because if we aren't flexible in those season lengths and, the fishery triples in effort, our preseason sampling when we go and issue the season length would be probably too long. Or the other way, could be way too short and we'd have to, continually be adjusting the season. So that's just a way for us to kind of, between plans, be able to adjust those season lengths. And it doesn't trigger anything. It just, tells us that if the participation grows beyond a certain point, it's on. In a pocket slide. Slide 48, way at the end, that one. Okay, there we go. So based on that, the participation during that time period, if we have less than 70 participants, which would be, people dropped out, or more than 116 people jumping in, it would just trigger us reevaluating those season lengths based on our preseason sampling and in-season sampling data that we've done to date. So just kind of give us a little flexibility to be able to kind of look at those midway through. And so
Basically, it's a safety measure built into the FMP.
yeah, so, and I think the division's preliminary recommendation is to support that adaptive management.
What does the advisory committee, feel? Anyone willing to put forward a motion to endorse the adaptive management proposed.
I will put forth said motion.
Let me get this shared on WebEx real fast.
I hear a second.
I'll second that.
Have a second. Any discussion?
Maybe.
Maybe.
Can we change the wording as in put forth by strategy 2 in the management options? That to me is a little vague and doesn't nail them down to this. And I'd hate for them to take more than they're entitled. This is what we just talked about. If the effort changes,
So you just want to clarify? Yes, I agree.
yeah, just to
Tier
hold their
strategy.
feet to that fire.
Yeah, so he's more referencing the actual wording that you have in the document into your strategy too. Mr. Elder.
Get that wording.
Coach supported
You're
harvest
saying the strategy
framework.
too,
Yes. Which is kind of just a,
but that's just,
It's,
that's talking about 10 bushels and 15 bushels a day.
um, basically the adaptive management framework as proposed by the division in the Culch supported harvest strategy in the mechanical harvest management paper. That'd be pretty specific.
okay, yep.
Culch supported harvest strategy.
Joe, does that match what you were talking about?
Yeah, absolutely.
Then I'm fine with that.
Any discussion? Seeing none. Blake? Not here. Bruno?
I,
Clark? Aye. Creighton?
Aye.
Dunbar? Gaskell?
Aye.
Mikowski?
Aye.
Newman?
No.
Worthington?
Yes.
Winslow, yes. Moving on to the clam. Recreational harvest and the mechanical harvest. Recreational first. Wasn't any, essentially pretty much the same thing as the oyster aspect of the clam. So no discussion was held on that. I'd entertain a motion, to support the division's recommendation to move forward.
Since it's essentially the same recommendation, I'll on that.
Do you want the same wording as the
Yeah.
original motion?
Yeah, just replace oyster with clam, sure.
Have a second?
I'll say that.
Second, by Worthington. Any discussion? Roll call vote. Bruno? Aye. Clark? Aye. Creighton?
Aye.
Dunbar?
No.
Gaskell?
Aye.
Mikowski?
Aye.
Newman?
Aye. Yes.
Worthington,
Aye.
Winslow, aye. Moving on to mechanical clam harvest.
Second.
Anyone have a motion?
I would move that we support the division's recommendation for the 3-year phase out with the, conditions as listed.
Should pull this up.
That capture you.
Yes, ma'am.
Do I have a second?
A second.
Have a second?
Sorry.
Discussion.
Who seconded that?
It's my understanding based on this, that most commercial captures of this has moved from mechanical to hand methods at this point, brakes, is that, am I wrong? Have they just quit?
I don't have that. though.
Yeah, I help inform that. So there's been a decline across the entire fishery, clam fishery, and mechanical, but much more, precipitous in the mechanical fishery. It's either folks are moving to completely other fisheries, or they're moving to private culture, or they're just giving up completely. We have seen increases in private culture in the past 20 years, but I don't think that is the complete picture. So once again, it's just a suite of issues. It's people are finding it profitable, moving to other fisheries or private culture.
Discussion? Seeing none, call to vote. Bruno,
Nay.
Clark,
Nay.
Creighton,
Aye.
Dunbar,
Nay.
Gaskell,
No.
Kowski.
Aye.
Newman,
No.
Worthington,
No.
Winslow, aye. Motion fails. Floor is open for another motion if anyone would like to make it.
Make a motion status quo.
Have a motion and a second relative to mechanical clam harvest to stay at status quo. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion. Bruno,
Aye.
Clark,
Aye.
Creighton,
No.
Dunbar, Gaskell,
Aye.
Kowski,
No.
Newman,
Yes.
Worthington,
Yes.
Winslow, nay. Motion passes. That takes care of both of the FMPs, I believe. You good, Jesse?
Yep.
All right, moving on. I think Jesse had some updates or some tweaks that'll be happening relative to advisory committee.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the schedule for 2025 and how we're gonna, or at least potentially how we're gonna do advisory committees in 2025. It's 8:19 now, and we actually did get through some of that faster than I was expecting, because we did run a little long on some of the discussion, which is, I personally think is fantastic. I love late meetings, y'all know that. But something that we've noticed, and this is a lot of information to take in one night of a meeting, and to get a presentation and to actually try to understand that presentation and really have the time to think about it and mull it over and really develop the opinions the advisory committee, the committee members have on that information. It's too much for one night. And what we're thinking about doing is having, rather than having this one meeting where we actually come and give a presentation, y'all ask questions about the presentation, deliberate, and then vote on the different options. What we're thinking is, prior to the suite of AC meetings that we would have, so like this week we're having the northern, the southern, and the shellfish, and then next week the habitat. Prior to that like week 2 of meetings, about a week before that, we would hold a virtual meeting that is a joint meeting, all of the ACs together, and it's still a meeting of the advisory committee. So it's not just like a presentation or a virtual meeting that you can choose to join or not join. It would count towards your attendance requirement and everything. But in that meeting, it would be a presentation. So like in this case, if we did it for oyster and clam, you would receive the presentations that you received tonight. You would receive those presentations virtually with all of the ACs together. And each AC would be able to ask questions from the presenters, from the staff leads, or from the species leads, and have the same discussion that we had prior to the public comment and prior to the vote at that virtual meeting. And then you would be able to take about a week, say, and think about it, really digest the information that you were presented. And then we would hold the actual in-person meeting where you would vote and deliberate on the different options that we have. And it's really something, I believe we tried something similar in the past where we did a presentation that was recorded and then sent it to the advisory committees. While I like that idea, I do think that there's some benefit of there actually being like interaction and being able to ask questions and stuff rather than just a recorded presentation. So if everyone's open to it anyway, I think we're going to try that for starting 2025 at the next meeting anyway in March. We also, and speaking of a meeting in March, we're going to try holding the meetings a little bit sooner, like a little bit closer to the previous MFC meeting. So typically, like in 2024, I think the February MFC meeting, we waited about a month and a half until April to hold the AC meetings, and now we're thinking of holding them in March, just so there's a little bit more time after the advisory committee meetings to actually fully develop what we heard from the advisory committees and take it to the commission. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts on that? I'm just curious of your.
I think it's a great idea.
Sounds good, yeah.
Well, we appreciate that.
That way everybody here, the southern, the central, and Northern, everybody can hear everybody's opinion. Probably won't take long, but it's worth everybody hearing everybody's opinion, because what we've done here tonight will be totally different from the South. Because I can tell you as a business person, whatever, that if I was in the South, I would say, yeah, let's close it down. So we're selling ours. No big deal.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Wayne, in that if we have all of the ACs together and the other ACs get to hear the discussion, there's some points that would be brought up that they might not otherwise hear. And I think Thomas.
Those in the southern, they're not oystering up here. They could care less.
Yeah,
Thomas?
I'm a little bit concerned with the length of time because 75% of these meetings is discussion. And if you've got 3-4 advisory groups together, you may be having a 3, 4, or 5 hour discussion. What's your idea time wise? What's this going to take?
Well, typically we wouldn't have two, like, so this meeting was a little bit different than some of the other ones where we normally only bring one plan to an advisory committee at a time. This one was a little different just because we're working on clam and oysters at the same time. Ideally, that would still only be a 2-hour meeting, and I could see it going longer than that. I think there's some I guess maybe benefit to it being virtual and that we don't have to worry about the advisors actually spending like Keith, I know you live down in Pamlico County. I believe you're not going to get home until pretty late tonight. So what's a 3.5 hour, 2.5 hour meeting right now? If it were virtual, you're going to be done at your house at 11. I'm not saying we should have a virtual meeting that lasts until 11, but if it's virtual, we do have a little bit more time built in just because there's no travel.
Yeah, I'm a little bit worried too that a lot of people aren't going to attend this virtual meeting because they don't really do virtual, and then we're going to. And I would,
Yeah,
it might be better if it's just like a question meeting versus a discussion meeting, is what I'm trying to say. Because
yeah, I absolutely
discussions.
Thomas, and that some discussion would be good, but really it's a time to hear the presentation and ask any specific questions that you have, and the time for the real discussion back and forth would be at the in-person meeting like we had tonight, when you're actually deliberating on the options. And I'm sorry if I cut you off some, Thomas. I don't know if you were breaking up or.
Anything else?
I do just want to update the advisory committee real fast on the previous Marine Fisheries Commission meeting in November. One of the things that the commission talked about was spotted sea trout, and the commission selected their preferred management options. And if y'all don't mind for just a second, I'll just update y'all on what their actual preferred management options were that they selected. It'll be going to the commission again in February for them to actually vote on final approval. So for that plan, for the sustainable harvest issue, they recommended for recreational a 14 to 20 inch slot limit with an allowance for 1 fish over 26 inches and a 3 fish bag limit. For the commercial sector, they recommended a 14 to 22 inch slot limit, a Saturday to Monday closure in October through December, and a Saturday Sunday closure January through September. They also voted to formalize management to formalize stop net management in the FMP, and they voted to adopt the adaptive management framework with the caveat that adaptive management actually be brought back to the Marine Fisheries Commission for review prior to implementation. They also voted to eliminate the captain and crew limit on for-hire trips. And for cold stun management, they voted to extend the fishery closure until June 30th. Following a cold stun, it currently is until June 15th. And to also adopt the cold stun adaptive management framework that the division recommended. And like I say, that was just them selecting their preferred management. The actual final adoption vote won't take place until February. Also, you may remember from the August commission meeting, they asked the division director to ask the secretary to open up the Southern Flounder Fishery Management Plan, Amendment 4, to allow for increased recreational access. The secretary did agree to open up Amendment 4 and at the same time to allow us to begin work on Amendment 5 concurrently. That kind of allows us to take a much broader look at Southern Flounder management. Amendment 4 will be a very, very focused amendment that's just looking at increased recreational access. And that draft plan will be going to the commission in February, assuming that all the timeline goes as planned. That draft plan will be going to the commission in February. They will vote to send it out to y'all, the advisory committees, for review and for public review at that meeting. So hopefully at your March meeting, you'll get to hear about flounder, which is everybody's favorite topic.
Anything else? Entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank y'all very much. Is that
That was a
that
unit.
was an eight-man house.
Stand up here.
Yep.
I should try.
Thank you, Morton.
Yeah, thank you.